Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So before I begin today, I want to apologize for how late this video is, but I was working on it during the weekend and I suddenly erased everything that I was working on. However, I think it's going to serve me well because I've decided now to chop this video into two, because I'm going to talk about one of the New York City Comicon panels. And there's so much here that I think it deserves at least two videos. And this panel, from what I believe is the largest Comic-Con in the United States, this panel is focusing on the future of Marvel Comics. And I talk about Marvel a lot, and some of you may be getting a little sick of me talking about Marvel, but quite honestly, if you want to talk about the future of comics, you have to talk about the future of Marvel. Because the future of comics is tied up with the future of Marvel. Even if they decide to keep nothing but garbage on the shelves, that flooding of the shelves is enough to stifle the ability of other comics and other creators to get into creating comics and allowing an actual audience to build with their characters. So this panel, which was Marvel staff only, they were talking about the future of Marvel. And the two people who are basically running this panel are Sana Amanat, the Vice President of Content and Character Development at Marvel Comics, who is basically in operational control of Marvel Comics, and her sidekick, Judy Stevens. And they both say that this is what the future of Marvel looks like. Now, very quickly, who is on this panel? Because when they're talking about Marvel here, they're talking about more than Marvel Comics. They have someone from a whole bunch of different platforms of Marvel and how they get their stories out there. You have Lauren Shipman, who is writing what she calls a podcast, but I would call a radio play, which is to take the storyline of Marvels and turn it into a radio play. So she's a writer. You have Mackenzie Lee, and she is a YA fiction novelist, and she has been tasked with writing Marvel anti-heroes for YA novels, so another author. Then you have Vita Ayala, who is a freelance writer for Marvel Comics, who has written Prisoner X and Shuri and is now writing Morbius. Then you move on to Beth Bryson. She is dealing with Marvel theme parks right now. And you have Marcia Griffin, who is the VP of Animation and oversees all family animated content that comes out of Marvel. And last but not least, you have Sandra Sad. And if you haven't yet heard this, she is the woman who is going to be playing Kamala Khan in the new Avengers movies. Because it has now been announced that Kamala Khan is going to be in the new Avengers movies. But the one that I want to focus on the most is Marcia Griffin. I want to go over her statements and then some of the other statements from these other people. Now, I'm going to give you a lot of what she says. I'm not going to play it for you because I know everybody hates listening to these people because it's like nails on a chalkboard having to listen to them. So I'm going to break it down and give you the quotes from this woman. Again, her name is Marcia Griffin. She is the VP of Animation, and as she says, she oversees all the family animated content that comes out of Marvel. She starts by talking about a new animated show. It's called Spidey and His Amazing Friends. Now, they never actually say who Spidey is. I take it to be Peter Parker, but really that's a huge assumption when you're dealing with these people. But it is going to star Spidey and Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen. Now, this is what she says. She says, Spidey and His Amazing Friends, which we are producing for the Disney Junior platform to start airing in 2021, and that is Marvel's first ever full-length preschool series. We've produced shorts for the preschool crowd before, but we've never done a full-length animated series for them. All right, let's stop there. Now, what is this audience that they are specifically targeting with this new show? Well, they are preschoolers. They are children who can sit down in front of a television or a computer and actually be engaged with what is going on in front of them, but have not yet gone to school. So we're talking about 3, 4, and 5-year-olds here. So this is their audience that they're targeting, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. She goes on to say, the stories, while simplified for the younger audience, are still filled with the same heart, the same action, the same everything. We're just bringing it to a very young audience and trying to make the stories relevant for them. And it's great to bring in a new generation of fans from a very early age. Now, I'm going to talk about this simplified story that she's mentioning later on, but what you want to focus on here is the fact that they are targeting, as she says, a very young audience. And when she says early age, that's not me putting the emphasis there. She said that specifically, from a very early age. So they're looking to target very young children. Again, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. She goes on to say, and the other show that we are now currently working on is Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. This is going to look different than anything we've done before. It will not be your typical superhero show. It's got a lot of comedy and a lot of edge. Now, first off, they're making a show out of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur because nothing says let's make a television show about these characters when they came from a book which could barely ship 7,000 copies per month. It went on for what, 50 issues? But on average, it shipped, not sold, it shipped about 7,000 per month. And we're talking about Disney. This is a multi-billion-dollar worldwide corporation, and they can't get this story to sell 7,000 copies per month. I can get, on average, 7,000 people to listen to my videos every week, and they can't get 7,000 people to read this book per month. And yet, this is what they want to bring into a show and bring into a larger venue. But I'm going to talk a lot about that in the next video. But let's concentrate on something else that she says here. She says it's got a lot of comedy and a lot of edge. Now, I can see comedy appealing to young children, but why in the world would a show for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds need to have edge? Because that's the specific word that she uses. Well, in my opinion, when she says edge, what she is saying is that this show is going to push the boundaries of what is acceptable to present to very young children. And when they get caught, when they get called out, they'll just say, oh, it's just because it's an edgy show, that's all. And by the way, the people who are making this show are the producers who make Blackish. And why in the world you would get producers of a show like that also making an animated series for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds? I don't know what's going on there. Now, next I'm going to read you the body of what she has to say. And this is a long quote, but I'm going to break it up a little bit, and hopefully you can get through it because this is the really important part here. She says, and both of these shows represent for us as an animation division, along with Marvel Rising. Now, that's very important. I'll come back to that point in a minute. So, along with Marvel Rising is this growing trend. It's sort of a quantum leap in animation, especially kids animation, which are female-forward projects with strong female characters as the lead. And she emphasizes that point, as the lead. Marvel, as a company, has always been creating and putting forth great female characters. But in the past, especially in kids animation, there was a sort of general consensus which is, boys won't watch it. If you have a girl in the lead, boys won't watch it. And then she goes on to say, same thing with films really, until recently, even with superhero films. So basically this woman is of the mindset that there were never any strong female heroes until probably Captain Marvel, which is a complete skewing of movie history for the last 20, 30, 40 years. But she goes on to say, so that was the idea. So every time you want to put something, with more female characters, or you wanted to do a female hero, what you heard was, boys won't watch it. Boys won't care. And my feeling is that boys didn't care because we didn't give them anything to care about. Now, I want to break in here for a second. You'll notice that she says it's her feeling. So they're going off of her feeling. Because, of course, if you go off of studies, if you go off of focus groups, if you go off of facts, you'll see that there's a very specific reason for this. And this is the way that it is according to the biology of boys and girls. But no, you got to go with her feelings. And then she gets to the meat of what she has to say. She says, so if you elevate the female characters and just, we're not trying to turn these female characters into men. We're just presenting them as people. Fully formed, intelligent, powerful people. Now, if you listen to this whole podcast, which, by the way, I'll put the link in the description for this. If you listen to it, you'll hear this word over and over again, both in this podcast and many others that these people put out there. It's all focused around power. They all use this descriptor for the female of power. But she goes on to say, and if young women, young girls can see each other on the screen as they feel that they're meant to be, as capable that they know that they are, that they can actually relate to the screen. If you give boys and young men a character that is just as strong and kicks ass with the boys and doesn't need saving, doesn't need rescuing, and isn't an annoying little sister or doesn't bother them all the time, which is what we've been treated to in the animation business historically, you're going to have an entire generation, all genders, all races, which are now being represented in animation. You're going to give them where they're not going to see it. where they're not going to see gender on the screen. They're just going to respond to the character as they are, and not as the little boxes we've always put them in before. So I'm really proud that Marvel is leading that way. We have a lot of female executives. The animation department is 2/3 female. You see all these wonderful women up here. Marvel has always been supportive of that. I'm so proud of being part of this tide that is turning right now. Now I'm going to get back to some of that in a moment. But right after she says that, Sana Amanat chimes in and says the following. She says, "Parents, also, it's your responsibility to encourage your boys to like female characters, and that it's okay, and that it's not a big deal, because they're just as great and powerful," there's that word again, "and powerful and awesome." So what do you have here? You have these two women, these two admittedly childless women, telling you as parents how they are going to raise your children with these stories, and how it is your responsibility to support this. But I want to go back and look at something very specific. What does she say here that young girls who are watching these shows, these 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, what are they supposed to see on the screen? Well, the young girls are supposed to specifically see the fact that there are female characters up there on the screen. That's what they have to take note of. But you'll notice that when she gets to the boys, what do the boys have to do? Well, the boys have to specifically not see this. She says quite specifically, and if young women, young girls, can see each other on the screen. But she says, boys, they're not going to see gender on the screen. Which is very strange, because the very next thing she says after that is to praise Marvel because they have so many female executives, is to praise their animation department because it's 2/3 female, to praise this panel because of all these women that are sitting up there. So she is specifically calling out the fact that you see these females here, here, and here, but the boys, these little kids, these 3, 4, and 5-year-olds are not supposed to see this. The young girls are supposed to see this specifically, but the boys are specifically not supposed to see this. Now this is really the nub of what is going on here. You have this division between boys and girls. The boys are being told, are being taught that they are, as she says, not to put people in these little boxes anymore. And by the way, just as an aside, these little boxes that she's talking about, this is an underhanded dig at reason and critical thinking. Why? Because reason and logic does specifically that. It takes things and lets you understand them according to reality by separating them off one from another and putting them into specific categories. That's how reason and logic work. So as I said, this is an underhanded dig at these things like reason and logic because, of course, what do you have to focus on? Well, like her, you have to go with your feelings. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of things from the rest of the podcast to show you what these little boxes include. These little boxes that the females are supposed to see, but the boys are not supposed to see. And we can do that by looking at this panel and see specifically what they call to your attention that they want people to take note of. Because these are females and they are trying to speak to a female audience. So they want these things to be called to the female attention. So what are these little boxes? Well, when they start off by introducing all of these panelists, what do these panelists do? Well, they announce their gender pronouns, every one of them. So not only is one of these little boxes gender, but also gender identity. And Judy Stevens starts off, as she usually does, by calling to everyone's attention the fact that Marvel used to have very few female-led comics. And look at them now, they have so many they can't even show them all. So again, you have to bring to the attention the fact that you have females there. Then you have the woman who is playing Kamala Khan. And I want to read you a short excerpt from what she has to say. She says, "For people who grew up like me, who didn't have someone to look up to like Kamala. I'm a first-generation American like Kamala. My parents are immigrants, and it's hard to connect. So growing up, having someone who looks a little bit like you in a video game or in a comic book that you can read about, who is strong, who is resilient, who overcomes feeling like the other, who has insecurities, and knows that it's totally okay to have these insecurities. It's okay. It doesn't make you weird." And she goes on to say, "I grew up knowing that I wanted to be an actor." And she talks about a few actors, all of them that are white, and she says, "I didn't look like them. I didn't look like these people. But now that I'm playing Kamala Khan, I feel so much strength in myself, in my weirdness. And it's fine. And I'm now able to embrace them more like she does. And when she says embrace them more, she's referring to she's able to embrace her weirdness more. So first of all, what other little boxes is she adding to the list here? Well, she's talking about immigration status. That is one of the little boxes. She's also talking about color, because she's saying she, as a child, saw all these white actors up on the screen and she wanted to be an actor, but she looked nothing like them. So let's add to those boxes color. But she also expresses something else here. Instead of talking about boxes, which is the negative way of talking about what they're looking at, she puts a positive spin on it, so-called, and she calls it weirdness. And what they are supposed to embrace is this weirdness. And I would say certainly those ideas are connected, because she talks about feeling like the other. This is exactly what these little boxes are. These boxes are there to separate you off as the other. But you need not feel like the other. You need not feel like you're weird. You have to embrace your weirdness. Now, to continue on, you have Sun Amanat right after that talking about that it was so awesome, her words, that two of these panelists behind the scenes were talking Arabic. So what do you add to this list of little boxes? You add nationality, you add race. Then you have Vita Ayala. And what does she have to call to everyone's attention? Well, she has to call to everyone's attention the fact that she's in a same-sex marriage. So, what else do you add to this list of little boxes? You have to add sexuality. You have to add sexual preference. And further, she goes on to talk about Morbius, which is the book that she is writing, and how she found it so hard to write Morbius because he's an older Greek guy, and how she is going to write a character who is a foil for Morbius, who is, as she says, specifically not like Morbius, in the way that we, referring to the panelists, in the way that we are not like Morbius. So you have this old white guy, because Greek would equal European, which would equal white. So you have this old white guy, and she has to create a character which is a foil, the opposite of this old white guy. So again, you have to add race, you have to add color, you have to add gender. So let's look at her list. What are all the things that are on this list of little boxes that boys should not be able to see? Well, these boxes include gender, gender identity, immigration status, color, race, nationality, sexuality, sexual preference. All of these things, these little boys should not be able to see, and the girls should be able to see. Now, some of you may be saying to yourself, well, isn't this a good thing? Don't they want these children to be colorblind? Don't they want these children not to see the differences? Isn't that okay? Why are you going on about this not being okay? Because this is a soft sell, very much a soft sell by these people, especially this woman who was talking. She knows exactly what kind of words to use to sell this. This is a soft sell because they're not talking about what you think they're talking about. If you know anything about progressive thought, if you know and understand exactly how they use language, which I have looked into very deeply, there is something that happens within progressives and progressive arguments. Because a lot of people have been saying to these progressive people, or used to anyways, say to them, look, you're talking about all these identity markers. You're talking about sexuality. You're talking about race. You're talking about color. I don't see that. And when these progressive types are told, I don't see that, these progressive types become enraged. Why do they become enraged? Because this is what is called, in the progressive language, erasure. You cannot do this. You cannot erase these things. Now let's look at a couple of characters and I'll show you exactly what I mean. If you look at, let's say, Bobby Drake, Iceman in Marvel, or America Chavez, everybody kept on saying, why do you have to take Bobby Drake? They're making him a homosexual. Okay, but why does that have to be the central point of everything that the character is about? Because that's what the character is. He's a flaming queen. And in every instance, he's a flaming queen. And the same with America Chavez. You have this woman. She's a woman of color. She's bisexual. She has two mothers. You have to make the intersectionality of all of these identity markers the very heart of everything that the character revolves around. Why? Because if you don't, if you make those things just off to the corner, if you take Bobby Drake and make him simply into a character who is homosexual and don't focus on it specifically, you don't place a white hot light upon it, that is what is known as erasure. And erasure is a form of oppression. Let's look at something like Richard Meyer's Jawbreakers. He has all of his characters. They have some kind of minority status. And yet these progressive types pile on top of him. Why? Because he doesn't make it the central focus of these characters. And if you don't make it the central focus of these characters so that it's shoved in the audience's face over and over again in every panel, if you don't do that, that is oppression of this identity group. So with that in mind, what are they talking about? What do they want these little boys to do? Because they're not saying that they want these kids to grow up not being able to see females, not being able to see any of those little boxes that I just listed off. They want them to see that, but they want them to see it in a very specific way. And you can see what exactly they mean by looking at what they say they want the female characters to inspire in little girls. These little girls are supposed to see these characters on the screen. And they're supposed to see these characters on the screen and recognize their power in order to empower these little girls. And since for the little boys, they are the opposite, they are supposed to, quote unquote, not see these things, what exactly would this not seeing entail? Well, this not seeing entails the reduction of the power of the male children. This is exactly what it is. It's supposed to make the male children to feel lesser about themselves. They want the girls to feel more about themselves, and they want the boys to feel less about themselves. Again, their whole ideology boils down to power. So they want the little girls to be more powerful, and they want the little boys to grow up being less powerful. And how do boys become less powerful? Well, they give up their reason. They give up their ability to put things in little boxes and to be able to distinguish between this and that. They use feelings to specifically understand things. And as I said, with Marvel Rising, last year's Comicon, they had an interview with another one of these VPs of animation and Sana Amanat that they were talking about Marvel Rising. Marvel Rising was made specifically for girls. They chose their animation company specifically to attract girls, and they had test audiences of girls and girls only. And when they talked about what they wanted the girls to do with this story, they wanted this story to show these girls that empathy was the most important thing. Empathy trumps everything else. That's what they were trying to sell to the little girls. So feelings trump everything else. And that's exactly what they're trying to do with this show, but they're trying to do it in an opposite way. They're trying to do the same thing for the girls, but for the boys, they're trying to take away their ability to reason. They're trying to take away their ability to critically think. They're trying to take away all of their ability to see things in the natural way that boys grow up, because this is part of biology. This is part of the mental health of a male child. They see things in a more mechanical way. This has been shown scientifically. But they need to drive this out of their minds from the time that they are 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And they do that by erasing these boxes. They do that by erasing their ability to see something as other. And they do that by promoting these children to use their feelings and embrace weirdness everywhere. As Sana Amanat said in her little speech before she introduced President Obama, she said, "Different is the new normal." This is what they're trying to teach. Different is the new normal. And they're trying to do it to these little children because, of course, children are at that age where there really isn't that much of a difference between the boys and the girls yet. And they want to make sure that that difference, that biological difference, gets beaten out of them. And this is where we come back to story and narrative, what they're trying to use story and narrative for. Because from the very words of this woman herself, what they're trying to teach these children and what the parents are supposed to enforce in these children is something very complex. If it was a simple thing that they're trying to teach, they wouldn't need the parents to reinforce this with their children. So yes, it is something that they're trying to sell that is very complex. But at the same time, what does she say? She says, these stories are simplistic. And this is exactly what is going on with Marvel here. And this is exactly what is going on with almost all the narratives that they're talking about. Because again, this panel is made up of people from the movies, from the television, from novels, from comic books, from theme parks. You have all of these narrative vehicles. And what are these narrative vehicles supposed to do? Well, the narrative typically is supposed to be the story itself. But that's not what you see here. They're not trying to sell the narrative of a story. They're trying to sell the narrative of their progressive ideology. And it's the same with any of these storytelling platforms. But to focus on comics, If you look at comics and the history of comics, you see that you had a narrative, you had a story, and they focused on the narrative of the story, and they usually threw in some progressivism here or there. But this has been flipped on its head. You now have a comic industry, and I would say a whole entertainment industry, which is selling you first and foremost the narrative of the ideology. That is the central focus. And they're trying to sell you this narrative of their ideology by disguising it as a story itself. And as we see here, they got no qualms whatsoever in selling this narrative of their progressive ideology as if it were a story to 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.